Here we go. Welcome to our invasive plant species webinar series put on by the Carroll, Coos, and Grafton County Conservation Districts. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. We have two different presenters who will be kicking us off. Just a couple of housekeeping things to get us started. We will have a Q&A at the end, so please put your questions in the chat. And if you can, please keep yourselves muted. If you, for any reason, have to leave this session, there will be a recording available and additional resources. And without further ado, I am going to transfer things over to Wendy Scribner, the UNH Cooperative Extension Forest Field Specialist for Carroll County, to teach us a little bit about Roundleaf Bittersweet.
Okay, and am I a presenter now? Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can find that here. And okay, are you seeing the full screen view?
It looks perfect.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, thank you for being here today. My name is Wendy Scribner. I work in Carroll County with UNH Cooperative Extension. Just want to let folks know that we do have a county forester in each county here in New Hampshire. If you have questions about managing your land, questions about resources and concerns on your property, and you can access a directory of who your county forester is by using this nhwoods.org website. So today I will be talking about some background information about bittersweet, about the plant itself, how to identify it, how to plan for its removal, and in a couple of general removal options to start with, and then we'll turn things over to Paul to give some more detailed examples of projects that he's been working on. But I wanted to start off by talking about what is an invasive species. There are really, to call something an invasive species, there are two conditions that need to be met. First is the species is not native to the ecosystem under consideration. So it's in this case a plant that is not native to North America. And the second part of that definition is whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic, environmental harm or harm to human health. And so in this case, Roundleaf Bittersweet, and I will probably refer to it as Oriental Bittersweet throughout the program, and apologize for that. I'm getting used to the new terminology. But Roundleaf Bittersweet is listed as an invasive plant here in New Hampshire. So some of the traits that some of these invasive plants have are they produce a lot of offspring. So they produce a lot of seed in the case of Oriental Bittersweet. Fortunately, in the case of bittersweet, the seed is mostly, I'm just trying to, it looks like there are people in the waiting room. I don't know how to let them in. Maybe Laura can figure that piece out. Fortunately, in terms of Roundleaf Bittersweet, most of the seed is viable or is most viable for the first year. You may get some seeds that remain viable and are able to germinate in the second or third year, but fortunately, most of them need to germinate in that first year. But these are plants that reproduce quickly. They take advantage of an extended growing season. These plants are often plants that green up first thing in the spring before anything else is green, and stay green after most of our native species have already dropped their leaves. So those can be great times of year to be scouting out new infestations, that sort of thing. Another trait is they're very adaptable. They're tolerant of different light conditions, tolerant of different soil and site conditions, so they can get established in a number of different situations. Just want to mention one study here of Mitchell and Powell. And what they did was they looked at plants in Europe that had been naturalized here in the United States. And they studied the plants in Europe and the plants here. And what they found was the plants here had 84% fewer fungal pests, and most of our plant diseases are fungal in nature, and 24% fewer pathogenic viruses. So these plants have a competitive advantage for all of the reasons that I just mentioned, in addition to the fact that they have less pathogens and parasites that are affecting them in the areas that they've been introduced to. This is a study from University of New Hampshire where they looked at 4 different sites over a 2-year period. And you can see these green bars. They basically counted all of the insects that were feeding on plants on all of these different sites. And what they found was that there were more insects on every single site on the native species, which are in these green bars, than there were on the invasive shrubs. So not only more individuals, but also more different families of insects were on the native plants versus the invasive plants. So again, another competitive advantage that these types of plants have, and a reason that they are able to succeed so successfully against our native plants. So for those of you who were here last week, Mike Gagnon showed this slide as well, really just looking at how invasive plant populations grow exponentially over time. And so you really only have a small window of time while you have small numbers of localized populations where eradication is really going to be an option for you. Once we start to see and recognize this plant, or in the case of bittersweet, recognize that the bittersweet is there, we're often past the eradication stage, and really the later, the longer it takes for us to start taking action, the more resources and the more time we're going to need to control that population. So that early detection and rapid response is really critical to successfully controlling these plant species. So moving on to description of roundleaf bittersweet. It's a perennial deciduous vine, often reaching heights of 40 to 60 feet. It sort of reminds me of what Tarzan vines must look like. The bark is tannish and furrowed. You can see on the left-hand side of the photo here. It can resemble a cantaloupe skin or peanut shells. I think that's a really good description of what this bark looks like. We typically find problems with this plant in disturbed edges of roads, edges of fields, along rivers and streams. They really take advantage of places where there's a little bit of increased light and soil disturbance. These plants, or the seeds, are spread by birds as well as humans. The birds ingest the fruits. The process of going through the bird's digestive system actually enhances the seed's germination rate. And then a lot of people really like the berries. They make wreaths out of them, or inadvertently, cut these plants down and, dispose of them somewhere else where those berries are able to get started again. Um, So looking at the leaves, the lower leaves of this plant are relatively round shaped, while the upper leaves have more of an elongated or football shape. They have toothed edges. I think of them as being relatively blunt teeth, and they're alternately arranged along the stem of the plant, which most of our plants are have that alternate branching pattern. And again, early in the spring, late in the fall is a great time to find this plant because it's beginning to green up before anything else is, or staying green. Roundleaf bittersweet has small greenish flowers. They bloom anywhere from throughout May and June, and the fruit forms in axils. And what I mean by that is you have the stem here in this top slide, and you have a leaf coming off the stem. The flowers are coming out right above these leaves, all along the stem. The fruit starts out with a green casing that over the summer turns yellow. That casing then splits open to reveal the reddish fruit um, underneath. So very distinctive look. And I will note that roundleaf bittersweet has both male and female plants. So you're often going to see this plant without berries, and that's going to be the male plants that you're looking at. And here in the middle, you can see that more rounded, blunt toothed leaf shape. It also has orange roots that sucker aggressively. So anytime you cut the plant at the soil line or you try to pull out the plant and you get some of the roots, but not all of them, those roots will send out suckers and you will get this flush of new root growth along with new plant growth above the soil surface. So this can be a real challenge with mechanical control of this plant. Is persistence is really needed because it almost feels like this plant is coming at you with a vengeance after you cut it that first time. So again, the challenges for roundleaf bittersweet has high seed production rate. Birds are moving these berries and these seeds long distances. That ability to aggressively root sucker. And also, this plant is relatively tolerant to shade. So it can establish really well in shady conditions. It does prefer full sunlight, which is why it's climbing or twining its way up vegetation to get up and over it and get to that full sunlight. But it can also establish well in a variety of different soil and site conditions. Want to mention that we do have a native bittersweet, American bittersweet, which is also a climbing vine. The fruits of this plant look very similar to the oriental bittersweet or the roundleaf bittersweet. Here on the left, you can see the oriental bittersweet, and you can see that there are fruits all along these twigs. If this had leaves, you would see these fruits that were, right in those axils of all of those leaves. Whereas the American bittersweet, the fruits are clustered at the tips of the twigs and branches. So that is a way to identify the native bittersweet from the oriental bittersweet. I personally have not seen the American bittersweet in just my travels. So I don't know how prevalent it is on the landscape. Most of what I see is the oriental bittersweet.
Butt in for a moment. I actually know where there's an American bittersweet, and it's about very large vine, and
Okay.
it's about 4 inches in diameter, and it's
Wow.
yeah, and but the big difference is that you don't see it's not spreading.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I
Oh, no, no, I'm glad you did. Yeah, feel free to interrupt. Um, Yeah, so just moving on to looking at, strategies to consider for a successful project, first identifying the plants that you have on your property and assessing the extent and the distribution of those plants, not only on your own property, but on neighboring properties. I'm in a situation where I've been trying to control invasive plants for a number of years, but on two sides of my property, I've got a lot of invasives on those adjacent properties, and that can really make it challenging to control those plants. Um, if you have a big infestation, you really need to prioritize where you're going to start, what your goals are. As I mentioned before, often eradication is going to be a real challenging goal to meet. Want to recommend Picking Our Battles. This publication was put out by New Hampshire Fish and Game. And if you go to the Fish and Game website and put Picking Our Battles in the search screen, you'll see some ideas and strategies for addressing invasive plants on different properties. So, just briefly, a couple of these strategies that you may want to consider. Uh, Focusing on removing invasive plants in priority habitats first. So if you have really unique wetlands, really important fields that are supporting unique um, species, that may be the best place to start your control efforts and then work your way toward other populations in less ecologically valuable places. If you have a stream on your property, starting at the headwaters and working your way downstream so that you are removing that upstream source of plant material. Focusing on disturbed areas on your property, places where you know there's been a disturbance, maybe a timber harvest. Those are areas that are often quickly colonized by invasive plants in general. You may want to start with small satellite populations where you might have a chance of eradicating them in these smaller population dispersed locations, and then work your way back to bigger infested areas. Um, Moving on to setting your goals. Again, with small populations, you may be able to eradicate these plants, but some other options to consider are, depending on the amount of time and resources you have to put toward this project, containing those invasives within their existing footprint may be, a goal to start with, or just excluding them from certain areas on your property, saying if they get to this point, that's where I'm going to start to control them. Or you may choose to try to just suppress them, keep them from producing seed so that they're not adding to that seed bank over time, which is then going to be eaten by birds and spread further. So when we look at controlling invasive plants and in managing them, we look at this integrated vegetation management system. And so number of different control options. Unfortunately for Oriental bittersweet or roundleaf bittersweet, the biological controls are not available for this plant. Hopefully down the road sometime we will have options for that. The only plant that I'm aware of that has a biological control for it here in New Hampshire is purple loosestrife. There is a Galarusella beetle that feeds on loosestrife, but it takes a long time to develop these, test them, make sure that they're not going to have unintended consequences in our environment. So we don't have one for bittersweet. Cultural control methods are really just trying to not move and spread bittersweet around. So, being very conscious of what you're doing if you're moving plants that have viable fruits on them, trying to uh, keep that movement of that material to a minimum. Really, with bittersweet, mechanical control and chemical control are going to be the two best suited tools for controlling these populations. So mechanical control can be anything from, repeated hand pulling, digging, mowing, or cutting these plants. So anything from, those tiny plants, you may be able to pull them from the ground, particularly when the ground is moist, bag them and remove them. Brush saws can be a great way to deal with sort of the brushy sized vegetation. Also things like weed wrenches, and then more significant equipment as you get to bigger infestations, particularly around fields and that sort of thing. Mechanical control on its own, um, uh, really persistence is going to be the key if you are not using this in combination with chemical control. In some cases, you may need to cut those plants up to 5 times during the growing season to just starve out that root system. And where you have really established populations, you may need to do that over a couple of years. I think a really good combination for dealing with bittersweet is mechanical control to really starve out that root system, followed up by chemical control where you're dealing with smaller plants, so you're using less of a chemical, but you're getting really good control. So moving on to chemical control methods, variety of options here, spraying the foliage, that low volume foliar spray. Typically, it's a low percentage of herbicide. Challenge with this is, if you have invasive plants that are growing in amongst other plants, native plants that you want to keep, you can have problems with that product drifting onto other plants and causing those plants to die as well. The cut stump treatment is a much more targeted approach to controlling these plants. And this can work great with some of those bigger vines where you sever that vine. The upper part of that plant is going to die where it no longer has access to the root system. You can take the herbicide, apply it to the cambium layer, which is just inside the bark and the sapwood. You can see the blue on this stump here. You don't need to cover the entire stump. It's really the sapwood and the cambium that's moving things around the tree. Those of you who were here last week, this is sort of, they call it a buckthorn blaster. You put your chemical mixture into this, add some dye, and then for smaller stems, you cut that stem, you dab on the herbicide, very targeted to the particular plants you're trying to kill. And then lastly, there's a basal bark application for larger stems where you're basically applying the product to the bottom foot or 2 feet of the stem of the tree all the way around. That has the ability to permeate through the bark, get into that cambium tissue, and then be moved around the plant. So mechanical control, you can do that anytime, as often as you want to do that. The more you cut those plants back, the more you are stressing that root system. You're taking those stored sugars and forcing the plant to use them. When it comes to chemical control, the best time to apply the chemicals is going to be from midsummer to leaf drop. You want to have
And I'm so sorry, Wendy. This is just a time check. So
okay.
if you want to wrap it up, thank you so much.
Yep, I have one more slide, so pretty good timing. Midsummer to leaf drop, that's when the plant's pulling the sugars out of the leaves down into the root system. And so the plant is actually going to help you get that chemical down into the root system. And so lastly, I just wanted to say that pesticides are classified as either general use or restricted use. If you are using general use chemicals on your own property, you do not need a pesticide applicator's license. But if you are applying them on, say, town-owned land, you're a Conservation Commission member, You either have to have a pesticide applicator's license, or you need to look at hiring someone like Paul that has the license and then can do the application for you. But it's really important to follow the labeling instructions. The label is the law when it comes to using pesticides. And that's what I've got. Now
Beautiful.
I need to
Oh,
turn things
no
over.
worries. I think I've got that. But thank you so much, Wendy.
Oh,
Um,
okay, so you are all set with I'm trying to get through different screens here.
Right. Laura, I just sent you a request to be able to share.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so our next
Okay.
presenter will be Paul Eaton, who is owner and operator at Keep It Natural in Stratford, New Hampshire. And we're going to learn a little bit more about chemical methods of control. Um, so thank you so much, Wendy, and on to Paul.
Okay.
All right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
It's a yes. Okay, great. Um, yeah, thank you. So thank you for the intro. And Wendy, thank you for all that great information. I learned a bunch listening to you. It's really, really interesting. And so my name is Paul Eaton. I'm the owner operator of Keep It Native Invasive Plant Management, and I'm based in Stratford, New Hampshire. And you know, invasive plant management is a passion of mine. And this is not my first career, but it just a series of events brought me to this, and I decided to start the company so I can help other people and do work at a larger scale, right, than just my own property. Um, so yeah, I jumped right to this picture, but it's a good picture to look at because I think the message I want to get across today is that you can control these plants, and I'm never going to use the word eliminate, right? And Wendy had said that. But you can control them with planning and persistence. And it certainly helps a lot if your neighbors are on board as well, right? If you live in an area where the invasive plants, cross property lines, which is often the case. Birds don't know anything about property lines, right? And spreading the seeds, and the wind doesn't either. Um, so yeah, what I'm going to speak about is basically, a lot of mechanical and herbicide control. I'm a licensed pesticide applicator, and I know people have different feelings about the use of herbicides, and I respect those feelings. Um, I think the way I look at it is the problem is on such a large scale that I feel like this is an important tool if it's used judiciously, very carefully with a lot of respect, to be able to cover a lot more ground in terms of the control of invasives. But that's a whole philosophical discussion, right? I'm just going to talk about the projects that I've worked on. I started the company in 2020, and this is a sample of projects that I've worked on. This particular one is for the Conservation Commission in Hooksett, New Hampshire, and this 100-acre piece of property is an old home site in the middle, and they're just overrun, with autumn olive, bittersweet, multiflora rose, Japanese barberry. So I started this project in April of 21, and this is what we came up to. This is before anything was done. Drove the tractor up. We knew it was going to be a day in April of mechanical control. And the goal of this, right, is to knock these massive plants back, right? And Wendy had talked about this, but with mechanical control, you can reduce the mass of the plants, and then when the plants pop back up, because they always will, you can spray small plants versus large plants that are sometimes over your head. Much safer for the environment and much safer for the applicator. This is what that area, the same angle, end of the day, this is what it looked like. There were two of us, the tractor, the brush hog, some chains, to move things around. And this was the goal, right? Was to get this cleaned up, to be able to see what we had there. When you could see in that last picture, you can't even see what's there, right? It's just a tangle. So you need to be able to see what's going on, right? And there's an old cellar hole over here from a barn. Off to the left, there's another cellar hole, for an old house site. So this is, in a sense, compartmentalizing the work, right? You've got to start somewhere, and it's often just make the site accessible, make it so that you can see what's there. So fast forward to July, right? I mean, 3 months later, and we can see what's covering the ground here. It is an absolute sea of bittersweet, right? It's all about knee high. It's just a slightly different angle, the same area. It is just covered with bittersweet. Some of the thickest bittersweet I've ever seen. This is early on for me in my invasive control career. We'll come back to that shot in a minute. While we were there in April, we just did an experiment. We cut some large vines, but didn't treat them because there's no point in actually applying herbicide in April. The plant nutrients aren't going in the right direction. They aren't going into the roots, right? So this is what we found just a mere 3 months later. This is how aggressively bittersweet regrows, and probably many folks on this call have seen that. Wendy, you certainly talked about it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It feels like when you cut bittersweet, you just make it angry,
Yeah.
right? And so that's what came back. This was probably the largest find I found out there. It was a solid 4 inches in diameter. I put the loppers in there for scale. I could not cut these with loppers. I had to use a
Yeah.
chainsaw. After I cut it, I applied a concentrated herbicide using a buckthorn blaster. When they showed a picture of that, just around the outer cambium, the outer layer of the vine, and that one application of a concentrated herbicide killed that root system. And you can imagine what the size of that root system is.
Mm.
And if you took a tractor and pulled that out, it would be extensive and orange. It would be very, very large, right? So this is the area. So in July, we did a foliar treatment, used a systemic herbicide, and did a foliar treatment of the bittersweet. Not pretty. It looks like a lot of destruction. But by using triclopyr, which is a selective systemic herbicide, you don't kill the grasses. You might ding the grasses. You will ding the grasses just for a year, but the root systems of the grasses survive. Going back to this is the year after I did the cut stump herbicide treatment on that same large vine. And you can see there was no regrowth gone. So it's and that whole process of cutting and dabbing, if you move them right along, it's 5 minutes. All right, this is the same area. The following June, starting to look better. The grasses really came back nicely. So it's really validating, right, in terms of using that selective herbicide, the selected systemic herbicide. And this is what it looked like. Let's see, just another 4 or 5 months later. No, 3 months later. So you can see the wildflowers are coming up, and the grasses are really filling in. I mean, you can see here in June, the grasses are coming back significantly, and by September, the grasses have filled in. I was very happy to see that. So, I showed this as an example of this is a challenging site. And by the way, the vines, and the small bittersweet plants in this particular site spread over at least 5 acres. I spent 3 years up there, and a member of the Conservation Commission that I know went up there this year. I didn't work there in 24 or this year. And he has a good eye for invasives, and he took a walk up there and told me that he barely saw anything. So that to me is proof of Wendy's comment about the bittersweet seeds. You know, they have a high germination rate, and you can exhaust the seed bank. But that once again, that goes back to persistence, right? You know, it was important to work on this project for 3 years because I continued to find, you know, small plants for the next couple of years coming up from the seed bank. That's just turning around 180-degree view in the other direction. So, all right, moving on to a different project. This is actually in my neighborhood, And you can imagine how I feel when I see this sort of thing going on. I drive by it multiple times every day. But this neighbor engaged with me. And so underneath, there's a tree underneath this. And there's trees here. You can see the trees. So I started to go after that mass with the tractor, the brush hog, and pulling things away. And by the time I was done, voila, there's an apple tree. And that apple tree still survives. There was enough of the apple tree, you know, still photosynthesizing. It hadn't fully died yet. So by pulling that away, grinding it down, we saved that tree. And then I continued to work in the surrounding area. You can see there's tons of vines. And also like the couple of years beyond that, I continued to do spot treatments of plants that were coming up in this area. So once again, the message is planning and persistence, right? You've got to like think about these projects. You have to compartmentalize them. How am I going to approach this? You know, I'm going to start with the large vines. I want to go after the seed producers. You know, if I have 2 or 3 years on this site, the most important thing to start with, you know, is eliminating the seed producers. So you stop the seed production cycle. This is an example of this is another client in my town. This is happens to be a business property, and you can see the bittersweet on the ground. It's a large white pine right here. The area where this pine was, there's really very little in the ways of invasives, on the way of invasives, but there in the other parts of the property there was bittersweet, and it's a pretty good bet, right, that the birds, you know, consume the berries, roosted in the trees and defecated. Each of those berries has on average 5 seeds. Um, so it's not just one berry, one seed. You'll see clusters. So you can see this right here. This is you know, like a cluster of bittersweet. This isn't just one plant. So it's probably, you know, some small number of seeds that would defecate berries that, you know, were defecated, that were consumed, but then there was, you know, a good number of seeds, right? So so I use triclopyr on that spot, and that's what it looked like 3 weeks later. And because it's a systemic herbicide, it does not. It's not a contact herbicide. You know, it's systemic. You spray it on healthy leaves, and you know it's systemic, and it, you know, translocates through the plant, and it takes. You have to be patient. You know, with bittersweet, it can take a solid 3 weeks before you see this. You could spray it and go back in a week. It still looks pretty green. Go back in 2 weeks, still pretty green. But then, you know, you have to be patient and just let it do its thing. So I go back to this client every year. I've been going back there for now probably 5 years, and I've never seen any more bittersweet pop up in this particular spot, which is very satisfying because if this hadn't been treated, that pine tree would probably be consumed by it by now. This is an outfield fence at a ball field, and I was hired because poison ivy actually is what really got people's attention. And then I don't have pictures of it, but further down this way, there was a very large patch of knotweed that, you know, ball players were hitting their balls into it and couldn't get them, couldn't retrieve their balls, and certainly they weren't going to get them with all this poison ivy. But you can see there's a lot of bittersweet in there. So again, sprayed with you know, triclopyr, right? And you can look up these different trade names because triclopyr is the active ingredient, right? This is the same spot, I think, by the end of the season, and this is with an assist from the facilities crew. You know, after everything had died back, They had mowed it out. We even went through and, cleaned out the fence in this case. But the knotweed was all down here.
Mm.
So I guess my point, continue to make it is, it looks overwhelming. Some of these projects look like, where am I ever going to start? How can I ever get through this? How am I ever going to make a difference? But if you just chip away at it and you have a plan, you start to make progress, and then progress begets progress, right? This is a different project. This actually belongs to a land trust. It's in Deerfield, and this is a property that has a lot of bittersweet, among other things. But I put this picture in because this is bittersweets spreading from the edge out into the field. The field is probably it's maybe 4 acres, and fortunately, not the entire field was not covered with bittersweet, but you can see it's pretty thick here. And you see these little driveway markers with the orange flags. It's part of my compartmentalization. It's kind of a logical approach, and it's an effective approach. You basically create lanes. Think of like bowling alleys, right? With these flags, and you stay in the lane, and you spot treat, each plan along the way, and go up and down, right? So that way, if your biggest enemy in being thorough is wandering, right?
Mm.
You have to have a plan and you have to stick to it. This is that same field, probably 3 to 4 weeks later, maybe a month later. So you can see the bittersweet has died. I'm sure there's still a few that I've missed. And you can see, there's still more work to do there along the edges. We had already eliminated a lot of the vines. You can see them in these trees. But it's a process of elimination with these plants, right? You go through and you get as many as you can, and you can't get them all, and you're going to go back next year, and they're going to be a lot easier to find, right? Um, I don't have a picture of when the grass is all greened up, but I'll have that this year. I'll add it into my presentation in the future. This is at my home in Stratford, and really a key aspect of invasive control is early detection and removal, right?
Mm.
So this is at the base of a nice maple tree. You can see I've got poison ivy in there, and some ferns, and then of course bittersweet because the birds are roosting. Um, and this particular plant could be cut and stem treated, which is what I would do here because it's right next to a tree. One thing you don't want to do is get overspray on tree bark because it will damage trees. Some trees are more susceptible than others. This is a large tree, probably a little bit on there would probably wouldn't damage it, but I don't want to take chances. So I'll either cut it and stem treat it, or I always work with like a hiking stick. I would take the hiking stick and just pull this out of the way, and then maybe spray it just away from the tree trunk.
Hello, Paul, and this is just your couple-minute warning.
Perfect. I'm almost there. This is behind my house. This is an experiment that I did. I let, once again, hickory trees, my neighbors have lots of bittersweet, birds defecated. I let this bittersweet go for 2 years. The first year was all pretty low, and then the second year it took off.
Mm.
I pulled this out. There's like very loose stuff on the ground there, so I was able to just pull it out, and the roots weren't that established. Tools of the trade. Love Fiskars. I don't work for Fisker. I don't sell Fisker, but they're good. They hold up. Small plants, you always carry one of these, the big loppers, and then for something that's too large, if you don't have a chainsaw, or this could be very easy. Buckthorn blaster, you can buy the kit online, and you buy the herbicide separately. Like Wendy said, if it's your own property, read the label, wear the PPE, do your homework, work safe. But you can do this. You can use these tools on your own property. It's my backpack sprayer. If you're going to do a lot of it, buy a good one. It's more of a fine-tuned machine than it is. This will hold up and it performs much better. You do spend a lot more on it than what you get at Home Depot. No knock to Home Depot. They don't sell these. Once again, cut stem. This is actually buckthorn. Couldn't find a cut stem picture of bittersweet. This is that same field I was showing you. The tools of the trade. I use a four-wheeler to get around because large properties, you gotta move, right? this is my last slide, but this is a new tool that I bought for this year that I'm going to actually mount to the four-wheeler, and it holds 14 gallons, and it's something that's going to make doing that field work much more efficient and probably much less likely to wear out my arm from all the pumping. And that's it. I don't have a website, but anybody in this call, I'm not trying to sell my services, but you can feel free to reach out to me and ask me questions. I'm happy to help educate people. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank both of you.
Well,
So we have a few different questions, but before we get to the Q&A, I just wanted to reiterate that this webinar series is put on by 3 different conservation districts. There are conservation districts across all of New Hampshire. So wherever you're joining from, there is a conservation district nearby. And if you reach out to one of us, we're happy to redirect you. We put on a variety of programming. We have a lot of different services that vary county to county, but mostly we're here for you. So thank you so much for joining us. Moving to the questions, we have a first question. I believe this one is for Wendy. You mentioned birds' digestive systems actually helping the seeds germinate. What about livestock such as cows, goats, sheep, alpacas, etc.? Is that true of them as well?
I don't know the answer to that, but I suspect that that could help. That going through that digestive system, the stomach acids can sort of scarify the outside of that seed. But I don't know specifically for livestock whether they help with that process.
yeah, and I don't have anything to add to that, Wendy. I would have answered it the same way.
Good to know. Um, for those of us with limited time and a lot of bittersweet, what strategy ends up being the most effective to kill bittersweet infestations? I'm guessing this is going between mechanical, chemical, other methods.
Can I take it, Wendy?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I really think that the first thing you want to do is stop the seed production cycle. And
Yeah.
if you have a tractor and you feel like pulling up roots, but I think you mentioned you don't have a lot of time. I mean, I feel like the buckthorn blaster, with the herbicide can be used safely, and just always go back to reading the label, being careful and making sure you know what you're doing. But you can cut through a lot of vines very quickly and dab a lot of vines with that and not have to go back to them. And if you're looking at a mass of bittersweet growing up a tree, walk behind the mass and you'll see the vines. The leaves are all growing towards the sun. And if you walk behind, you can actually see what you're doing. You don't have to like cut through all of that vegetation. You can, much more easily access the vines.
Along the same vein, we have a question for you, Paul, about could we accomplish the same results with mechanical means only?
I think you could. Yes, it just depends how much time you have, right? If you have a tractor, I'll just go back to that because some of those large vines, right, would require a piece of equipment to pull them out. One thing to keep in mind is that you need to pull the entire root out. If you leave any fragments, which you are almost certainly going to, if you're pulling out a large root, you'll leave some fragments and they'll grow back. You can go back and pull them again, right? So for me, using herbicides, right, it's working at scale, and getting a lot done for my client's budget. But if you have time and you have persistence, you can do very well with pulling.
Great. Another question is, what about fine mass in areas you can't access easily, well, like within stone walls, steep slopes, or swampy land?
Um, yeah, stone walls. I mean, I don't want you guys to think that I'm gonna sound like a broken record, right? But Buckthorn blaster, you
Mm,
know, you snip the vine, you dab it. You don't have to pull it out of the stone wall or try to and have it break and have it grow
mm.
back. Um, Steep slopes, yeah, those can be very challenging. I've worked on some steep slopes, and I mean, you just have to proceed with great caution. Make sure you have something to hold on to. Um, and wet areas, there's state laws, right? Or there's laws around using pesticides within 25 feet of like wetlands and non-public waters. And non-public is anything that's 10 acres or smaller. Anything that's over 10 acres is public water. And then you have to be 50 feet away. And it's also category 4 rivers,
Mhm.
are public water, right? So you have to be 50 feet away. Um, Even if you own the property, and if you're not a licensed pesticide applicator and you own the property legally, you can't go within 50 feet of the water. If you are a licensed pesticide applicator, you can get a permit through the state to work right up to the water line. But there's no circumstance where I can apply herbicide to anything that has wet feet. That's actually, in a wetland, not even with a permit.
It's a great point. Um, Another one. Do you need to decontaminate your mechanical equipment after clearing an area? If so, what processes do you use?
Yes, absolutely. I use a leaf blower. Um, and I bring like a little wisp broom and I bring a leaf blower every time I move my tractor around and my four wheeler as well. Um, when I'm done working at the field that's behind me in this picture, right, which is the same field that I showed you guys. That's the last thing I do as I before I put the tractor on the trailer. I open up the hood, I pull out the screens that go in front of the radiator. I lift the seat up, I very, very thoroughly, blow it off with the leaf blower. And because I don't want to spread the seeds around to the best of my ability.
And I'd say that's particularly important if you're dealing with something like Japanese knotweed, which you'll be talking about next week,
Mhm.
where bits of root and bits of the upper plant can actually establish whole new colonies if that gets sort of caught up in your equipment and you're, mowing an area, that sort of thing. So that, knowing how the plant can reproduce. If it can reproduce vegetatively from these nodes like Japanese knotweed, you've got to be super careful and you know, if you're using equipment to make sure you're not moving those pieces around.
Right. The first step with that, along with what Wendy is saying, is just to avoid, never mow Japanese knotweed
Hmm.
intentionally, right? It can
Yeah.
happen. You might come across it when you least expect it. But I think in that case, Wendy, what I would do is if I ran through knotweed, which I've never done, knock on wood, I would stop my tractor right where it was and clean
Mhm.
it off,
Yeah.
thoroughly because I don't want to spread it anywhere on the property.
Definitely don't want to make it worse while trying to rectify the situation.
Hmm.
We have a comment that there was a study at the University of Minnesota that seeds of buckthorn are not viable after passing through a goat's rumen. So I suppose that might be a good thing to look into, but don't
Yeah.
know about bittersweet.
So,
How does,
what was that, Laura? What was that again? They aren't viable. What?
after passing through a goat's rumen,
Oh, okay. I don't know anything about that.
we have another question. How does overspray or migration of chemicals affect aquatic environments? And I suppose this is getting into the wet feed issue.
Right. Wendy, do you want? I mean, I've done a lot
Well,
of.
I'm thinking in terms of you have different formulations that will, um, you know, adhere to soil particles so that they're less likely to move, and then different formulations that may be more problematic. And so if you're, concerned about that, certainly I think when you are applying the chemicals, you want to be very aware of what the wind conditions are, the potential for drift. And also if you are in the vicinity of aquatic environments, really looking for the product that is going to really stay in place and not migrate through the soil and get to the water system or the aquatic environment. That's sort of my thinking there.
I can't speak like, as an expert on the impact on aquatic environments, but I guess I can speak as an expert on, or at least as an applicator on its when we're looking at a site and making a plan, it's one of the most important things that we're looking at is all water resources. Any surface water, wells, it's you just proceed with the utmost of caution and or stop, right? If you're not comfortable with a situation. I consider myself an environmentalist, and I know some people that make some people wonder, right? Because of what I work with. But I consider it to be most important, and it's an enormous responsibility.
In the DES website, there's also a place where you can check for, locations for public and private wells. And I would suggest you check your area before you're applying pesticides. You could have neighbors' wells that you really want to be aware of where they are and, keep set back from those resources. And then again, public water sources, there are specific setbacks that
Right.
you need to follow for public wells. Depending on whether they're gravel packed or not, there are different setbacks. So good to just check on, where those resources are before you start spraying the plants.
Yeah, I think it's the key is to always use if you're using herbicides as a tool, to use them as judiciously and as minimally as possible, to get the job done.
Mm.
Along that vein, what other chemicals are effective besides triclopyr? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And
Oh,
how deep do bittersweet roots go?
Sorry, was that two questions or was it?
Yeah.
That was two questions.
Okay. Well, I mean, glyphosate, right? That's the active ingredient in Roundup and other products, but that's a systemic, non-selective herbicide. And that's very effective, with the roots. I keep it to a minimum, like what I keep in my inventory, and I use primarily those two. Wendy, did you have anything to add?
Can you repeat the second part of the question?
Sure. How deep do bittersweet roots go?
Okay, yeah. Most of our roots are going to be within the top 18 inches of soil. And so, depending on a lot of our soils are very rocky that you may get deeper soils where they're able to get a little bit deeper, but most of your roots are going to be in that top 18 inches. So, of any of our plants. With the exception of plants that have a taproot.
Yeah, if you take a relatively small bittersweet root, like maybe the size of your pinky or something or a finger, and if the soil is loose enough, and you pull on it, and I've done this
Mm.
my own home and for clients, you pull it, it'll go quite a distance, and it's right along the surface, but it has a lot of small, I don't know, branches that come off it, right? So it takes a while to pull it and get it all. You have to pull it slowly, grab it close to the soil, pull it up a foot, grab it close to the soil again. But it is close to the surface.
Can you specify what herbicide used in buckthorn blasters and what concentration of the active ingredient?
Um, you can so you can use either, and I'll just talk in active ingredients, right? You can use either triclopyr or glyphosate, and usually around 25% is sufficient. But that means, so you have to actually buy a concentrate, read the label, follow the label instructions, do the math,
Hmm.
and add. And it's really important that you do that math and study that label so you understand what you're doing, and and dilute it down to the concentration that you want. Um, but 25% active ingredient is a lot, but it is for getting into the roots, it's very effective. Wendy, I don't know if you have any different opinions on that.
No, I would say, again, check the label.
Mhm.
It
Yep.
will have instructions for if you're using that chemical as a foliar spray. It will have recommendations for what concentrate to use for cut stump. It should have recommendations for that. And yeah, doing
Right.
that math is really important. I've seen some studies where there's a lot of talk about the amount of pesticides in the environment and people think about farms applying a lot of pesticides, but it's often us in our backyards just saying, I want to kill this thing, using much more pesticide than we really need to use.
Right.
So if 3% will work, you want to leave it at 3% and not say, well, I'm definitely going to kill this with 6%. You want
Well,
to follow the label.
and it can actually be counterproductive to mix it too strong because if you mix it too strong, it can act more like a contact herbicide and just kill the roots, kill the leaves, and not be pulled into the root system. So
That's a good point.
yeah, do your homework. There's all kinds of fact sheets out there on all the invasives. NRCS is a great resource. The state of New Hampshire is a great resource.
Mhm.
Cooperative Extension. Um, and read it. Just don't take any shortcuts. Do your homework.
And Paul has provided a couple of fact sheets from various sources that will be included in the webinar notes. So keep an eye out for that when the recording goes out. One final question. Do ticks tend to concentrate among bittersweet leaves and vines? And if so, how do you protect yourself?
I haven't noticed that in particular. Um, I've rooted around in a lot of bittersweet, and on my hands and knees cutting vines, and I haven't noticed that. It's much worse if you're like in a field like what's behind me, um, compared to like being in the tree line.
There has been some research done regarding ticks and barberry, and they have found higher tick populations around barberry plants. And there's some thinking that it relates to, the just slightly higher humidity in those environments, in and around those plants. But I haven't heard anything about bittersweet um, creating those conditions.
We know that if you wear the long pants, like well, you would be doing, and you tuck your pants into your socks and do all the right things, and you have your clothing sprayed with I can't think of the name.
Permethrin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, but even then, you get home, you step into your mudroom or your garage, close the door, and strip.
Yeah.
Take your clothes off, have another set of clothes right there that you can put on, and then take everything that you were wearing and put it in your dryer, for 10 minutes. And if there's any ticks on it, that heat from the dryer will dry them out and kill them. So awareness is like, to me, is the number one thing. I
Mhm.
haven't had Lyme. I've been out in the pucker brush a lot, and that's what I do. I get home, I take off my field clothes immediately. I don't walk through the house. I don't walk out to my bedroom. I take them off immediately and I put them in the dryer. So, and then I examine myself. in a mirror, right? And so the great thing about ticks is they don't fly and their bite is not immediately going to, but it takes time, right, for their
Mm.
bite to actually transfer the bacteria. So I'm very thankful that ticks don't have wings. So anything
Those
else? I
are,
know, I'm sure we have a hard stop, but I'm happy to stay on.
I think that that is it for our bittersweet specific questions. Um, but if you'd like, I'm happy to provide emails so that people can ask any more questions. Like I said, there will be a recording available for this session. So, yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope that you have a wonderful evening and keep an eye out for Bittersweet.
Sure. Well, it's not hard to find it.
Yeah.